Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John DeLynn. It is January 18th, 2021, and I have what I believe is a really, really important and hopefully not too long, kind of brief Mormon Stories Podcast episode. I'll do my best to kind of keep this under 30 minutes, which is a land speed record for Mormon Stories Podcast. But today, the topic is something that is near and dear to my heart, and also, I believe, near and dear to the heart of hundreds of thousands of Mormons across the world. This presentation is entitled "The Miracle of Forgiveness: Why It Should Be Banned from Deseret Book and How You Can Help." For those of you who don't know, for those of you who, let's just say, haven't been raised Mormon, or have been living under a rock for the past few decades, or just curious about Mormonism. The Miracle of Forgiveness is a book that was written by one of the Mormon prophets named Spencer W. Kimball. Spencer W. Kimball was a beloved prophet who was a prophet in the 70s and 80s within the Mormon Church. And he wrote this book called The Miracle of Forgiveness, which was supposed to be all about how Jesus and Christianity and the Mormon Church and the doctrine of repentance can help people heal and grow and become healthy and strong through the atonement of Jesus Christ. Unfortunately, it is one of the most hated, odious, and damaging books in the history of the Mormon Church. And I know that that is really extreme rhetoric, but I think it's true. And of course, I welcome everyone who's joining us now on YouTube or on Facebook to share their experiences and reactions to this book. And I'll copy them and paste them into the comments so that they can be held as kind of a record for the damage, the true and sincere damage that this book has caused Mormons for generations. But we're going to get into that now. As to why this book is so damaging and needs to be banned. But I want to begin by just sort of like laying down the stake. I am super grateful that one of my listeners reached out to me a couple days ago and just said, John, did you know that the Miracle of Forgiveness is still sold at Deseret Book? And of course, I did know that. I had one of my listeners reach out to me and say, wait a minute, I thought that book wasn't being sold at Deseret Book. No, you're wrong. The Miracle of Forgiveness is still sold at Deseret Book. And if you go up there right now, go to deseretbook.com. As of January 18th, 2021, the book is still there. It's still available. And of course, it's also available at Amazon. It's available globally at various bookstores. And I should add, it's in almost every single Mormon home across the globe. It's in many chapels and ward houses across the globe. And it's a book that's pervasive. In fact, when I was a missionary, and I think to this day, this has been the experience of hundreds of thousands of Mormons, there are only a few books that were allowed to be read as a missionary. Jesus the Christ, the Articles of Faith, Marvelous Work and a Wonder, and of course, the Miracle of Forgiveness. And I think that almost every bishop who's ever been Mormon and served as a Mormon bishop has recommended this book to anyone who went to them for repentance. And I dare to say that to this day, Mormon bishops are still recommending the Miracle of Forgiveness as the standard, as the basic book to give to their members when the members are sinning, when they're caught masturbating, when they're caught engaging in violating the law of chastity, and especially if they're same-sex attracted or gay or lesbian or bisexual. This is the standard, this is the standard book to this day for Mormon leaders and mission presidents and stake presidents to deal with the sin of their members. And this is particularly egregious because this book is so odious. This book is so terrible. And I'm going to make the argument now for why this book is what I believe should be classified as hate speech. Now, a few disclaimers again. Part of me has a very warm place in my heart for Spencer W. Kimball because he was the prophet of my childhood. And he kind of comes across as this beloved grandpa, kind of Yoda-like prophet. So I know this is going to be difficult for many people to hear. And also, just generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of cancel culture or book banning. I think in general terms, banning books is not productive. And I don't believe in sort of cancel culture per se, or at least I don't believe that it's effective. In this case, because I view this book as hate speech, I'm making an exception. I think this book should be banned, and I think some very drastic measures need to be taken. And I'm going to be calling for all of you at the end of this presentation to help me with this charge, and I'm going to give you specific instructions on how together we can do something really good for the Mormon Church. So with those disclaimers, I am going to now make the case for why I believe that this book needs to be banned. So here we go. I believe that number one, the biggest problem with this book is that it's written by a past Mormon prophet. For those of you who don't know, Mormons believe that their prophets, the presidents of their church, are prophets, seers, and revelators, and they literally believe and are taught that Mormon prophets speak to God. And so off the bat, and this is past and present, past prophets as well as current prophets speak to God and speak for God. And so in the Mormon mind, the words of Spencer W. Kimball are equivalent to, are equal to the words of God. So that's problem number one with the miracle of forgiveness. Problem number two with the miracle of forgiveness is that this book, The Miracle of Forgiveness, qualifies as hate speech. Now, I know that that's a really dramatic thing to say. It's probably offending many of your ears, but I am now going to make the argument for why I believe that this book qualifies as hate speech. And I'm going to make the argument at the beginning and at the end as to why this book is so damaging, because hate speech is one thing, but hate speech masked as the word of God isn't just odious and terrible and awful. I believe that it's deadly, and it's far too long that this book has been on our shelves, in our homes, in our churches, and on the mouths and on the lips of our top church leaders. Hate speech masked as the word of God is deadly, and I do believe that this book is deadly for so many reasons. And now let me make the case as to why. Let me now read to you just a few. This book is hundreds of pages long. I'm going to read to you just a few of the words that are found within the cover, within the pages of this book, a book that is currently sold at Deseret Book on the Mormon Church's website today. Okay, here we go. On the topic of homosexuality, as Spencer W. Kimball likes to call it. He uses hateful homophobic rhetoric. I'll just give you one quote from page 78. Homosexuality is an ugly sin. He calls it ugly. That's hate speech. He calls it repugnant to those who find no temptation in it, as well as to many past offenders who are seeking a way out of its clutches. Calling someone's sexual attraction that they're born with, that they didn't choose, that they can't change, calling it ugly and repugnant and a temptation, and telling people that they're in the clutches of it is hate speech. It's damaging. It teaches them to hate themselves, and it teaches Mormons, Mormon parents, Mormon leaders to hate the behavior and to hate even the very disposition. That is hateful rhetoric if I've ever seen it. Ugly, repugnant, clutches, awful. But let's go on. It gets worse. Spencer W. Kimball in The Miracle of Forgiveness claims that homosexuality leads to bestiality. He writes on page 78, sin in sex practices tends to have a snowballing effect. Thus it is that through the ages, perhaps as an extension of homosexual practices, men and women have sunk even to seeking satisfaction with animals. There it is. He's equating natural, normal, same-sex attraction, same-sex behavior, even same-sex love with sin and with bestiality with animals. That teaches self-loathing, that teaches hate speech, and that teaches parents, leaders, and LGBT Mormons to hate themselves in really awful, terrible ways. It is dehumanizing, it is fear-mongering, and it is terrible. And this book is being sold today, January 18th, 2021. It can be found on the Deseret Book website. But it's worse. It gets worse. As we continue with what Spencer W. Kimball writes in The Miracle of Forgiveness, he refers to homosexuality as an evil disease that is curable. He writes, after consideration of the evil aspects, the ugliness, and the prevalence of the evil of homosexuality, the glorious thing to remember is that it is curable and forgivable. Certainly it can be overcome, for there are numerous happy people who were once involved in its clutches and who have since completely transformed their lives. Therefore, to those who say that this practice or any other evil is incurable, I respond, how can you say the door cannot be opened until your knuckles are bloody, till your head is bruised, till your muscles are sore? It can be done. There is so much that is damaging about this quote. Again, he's calling homosexuality or being LGBT evil. He's calling it ugly. He's calling it curable. He's calling it sinful. He's calling it, he's using the term clutches. That again is terrible. But once more, he's selling the terrible, odious, unscientific practice of conversion therapy or reparative therapy, which science has demonstrated on every level that attempts to change your sexual orientation not only do not work, but are damaging. I myself did a PhD level dissertation with over 13 scientific journal articles now published on same-sex sexuality. All of the findings universally are that same-sex attraction is not a choice, that it is biological, and that it can't be changed, and that explicit attempts to change same-sex attraction or homosexuality cause harm to the person who attempts to change it and can even lead in suicidal ideation and or death. So it's damaging to teach that this is sinful. It's damaging to teach that it's evil. It's damaging and even deathly to teach that it can be changed. You are selling false hope and you are harming people. So these teachings by Spencer W. Kimball in The Miracle of Forgiveness around homosexuality teach Mormons to hate homosexuality. They teach LGBTQ people to hate themselves, and they give false hope and false expectations to LGBTQ Mormons. And again, this book is sold today at Deseret Book. You can buy it right now. And it's, again, on the bookshelves of most Mormons across the world and on the lips of bishops and stake presidents and mission presidents all throughout the world within the Mormon Church. Just another quote that just to really drive this point home, another quote on page 83 of The Miracle of Forgiveness. Accordingly, some totally conquer homosexuality in a few months. Not true. People do not change their same-sex sexuality with efforts with conversion therapy. So that's untrue, unscientific, and damaging. But it goes on. Others linger with less power and require more time to make the total comeback. The cure is as permanent as the individual makes it, and like the cure for alcoholism, is subject to continued vigilance. Again, it's comparing same-sex sexuality, same-sex love with a disease, and then it's offering a false cure, false hope, false promises, and it's comparing same-sex sexuality to alcoholism, which is a drug addiction, totally incomparable, totally damaging. And it's saying that it can be cured within a few months. In our finding, with over 1,600 people, 0% were able to change their same-sex sexuality. And again, efforts to change it resulted in self-harm, harm, and sometimes even suicidal ideation or actual death by suicide. So this is an odious, hateful, unscientific, and damaging teaching, and it needs to stop. And Deseret Book needs to stop selling this book. So conversion therapy is damaging, anti-scientific, and deadly. All right. But there's more. If that weren't enough, there's more. Spencer W. Kimball in The Miracle of Forgiveness on Masturbation, he writes, quote, and this is on pages 77 to 78. Thus, prophets anciently and today condemn masturbation. It induces feelings of guilt and shame. It is detrimental to spirituality. It indicates slavery to the flesh. Not that mastery of it and the growth towards godhood, which is the object of our mortal life. Our modern prophet has indicated that no young man should be called on a mission who is not free from this practice. Wrong, wrong, wrong. It does not. Masturbation does not induce feelings of guilt and shame. You know what induces feelings of fear and shame, guilt and shame? The miracle of forgiveness. You, Spencer W. Kimball, you, Boyd K. Packer, you, Mormon Church prophets and apostles that have demonized and dubbed unclean a universal and healthy practice that Mormon bishops, Mormon stake presidents, Mormon general authorities, Mormon mission presidents all engage in. You find me one Mormon bishop, stake president, general authority who does not engage in who has not or does not engage in masturbation. Women and mothers and church, female church leaders too. It is nearly a universal practice. And you know what? The only reason Mormon youth and adults feel shame about it, feel guilt about it, feel self-loathing about it is because of books like The Miracle of Forgiveness and because of talks like those from Spencer W. Kimball and Boyd K. Packer. To call it slavery of the flesh is just wrong. It's a universal practice that modern scientific mental health practitioners have found to be healthy and normal. So stop it. This book is causing the problem that it claims to seek to be solving. It explicitly creates the guilt and shame that it decries. And that's odious of a religion to hold itself up as the cure to the disease that it creates. And that's what any teaching about masturbation, and especially Spencer W. Kimball's teachings about masturbation, do. Run from any organization that holds itself up as the cure to the disease that it creates. That's particularly evil and odious. But wait, there's more. In this book, Spencer W. claims that masturbation leads to homosexuality. He writes on page 78, quote, "What is more, it too often leads to grievous sin, even to that sin against nature, homosexuality. For done in private, it evolves often into mutual masturbation, practiced with another person of the same sex, and thence into total homosexuality." First of all, what is total homosexuality versus partial homosexuality? That's just weird. But you know, it's even more weird. This self-projection that Spencer W. Kimball seems to be doing, where he's basically saying, number one, that masturbation leads to homosexuality. If that were true, all men would be homosexuals, including Spencer W. Kimball. But once more, what is this weird, creepy inference that once you masturbate, you start masturbating with other men or women? That's just creepy and weird. I can promise you, I've never had the desire to engage in mutual masturbation with other men. And I have never had a temptation once to be attracted to the same sex or the same gender because of masturbation. In fact, what we know now is that masturbation doesn't lead to same-sex attraction. Same-sex attraction is not a choice. It's something that comes in your brain by the time you're born, and it has nothing to do with drinking water. It has nothing to do with sleeping or eating or with masturbation. That's just a damaging, fallacious, unscientific, egregious, outrageous claim, and it's in a book sold by Deseret Book, referred by Mormon bishops and stake presidents in January of 2021. We should all be outraged that this book is still being sold today. This book, as it relates to masturbation, is fear-mongering, again, with a nearly universal and healthy practice of masturbation with strange and unscientific projections. But wait, there's more on sexual chastity, or the law of chastity. Spencer W. Kimball writes, also, far-reaching is the effect of loss of chastity. Once given or taken or stolen, it can never be regained. Even in a forced contact, such as rape or incest, the injured one is greatly outraged. If she has not cooperated and contributed to the foul deed, she is, of course, in a more favorable position. There is no condemnation where there is no voluntary participation. It is better to die in defending one's virtue than to live having lost it without a struggle. There is so much that is wrong with this quote. First and foremost, it's talking about someone's virginity as being taken or stolen, and that it can never be regained. Our worth is not tied, Spencer W. Kimball and Mormon prophets. Our worth is not tied to whether or not we have had sex or engaged in sexual activity. We are not pure if we're virgins. We are not unpure or unclean if somebody touches us in our private parts, or if we touch somebody else in their private parts, or even if we engage in premarital sex. That is just human behavior. It has happened since the dawn of time, and it will continue to happen. There should be no equivalence of engaging in sexual behavior with worth or with purity or with well-being. And to teach that is to teach the chewed gum metaphor. It's to teach the nail in the board metaphor. It's to teach the licked cupcake or the handled Snickers bar metaphor. It teaches our youth and adults that they should feel shame and dirtiness and loathsomeness for engaging in what is normal and some would argue healthy. Now, I'm not arguing for rampant promiscuity and, unsafe sex and, irresponsible, that sort of behavior. There are healthy ways to educate our youth and adults and to engage in consent-based healthy sexuality, and to even wait to engage in certain sexual behaviors until, commitment and until serious commitment. But this type of rhetoric, this purity rhetoric, this virginity rhetoric is egregious. But this additional rhetoric about rape, where it's talking about women being raped and having their worth or value taken from them when they are raped, is outrageous. It's the stuff that Elizabeth Smart felt when she was kidnapped and then raped. One of the reasons she said she didn't run away from her rapist was because she felt like she had no more worth once her worth or value was taken from her by the rapist, by Brian David Mitchell. And it comes from this rhetoric from this book that is still being sold at Deseret Book and recommended by parents and bishops and stake presidents and mission presidents worldwide. And then it talks about a rape victim is kind of off the hook if they didn't contribute to the foul deed or cooperated. How can a rape victim cooperate in a rape? They're raped. It's outrageous. And this book is being sold today. And again, ending with the most vile and awful teaching that it is better to die in defending one's virtue than to live having lost it without a struggle. Really? So you should kill yourself other than be raped? And if you've been raped, it's worse than if you had died? What? And then finally, regardless of rape, it's equating premarital sex with something so awful that you should have died. It is better to have died than to have engaged in premarital sex. That's just wrong, and it's hurtful, and it's evil. And this book is being sold by Deseret Book by someone that Mormons today believe is a prophet, seer, and revelator. I hope you are as outraged as I am about this book. And it goes on. There's more. Let me read more, as if that's not enough. On page 225, Spencer W. Kimball writes, teenage car accidents far exceed those for other ages, but these physical hazards are the lesser ones. The dead may live again. The crippled may be resurrected with whole bodies, but the blighted soul, the scarred life, the violated youth with virtue lost, these are the real tragedies. Do you get that? He's saying that to lose your virginity is worse than death, that it's better to have died than to have had premarital sex. He's using terms like scarred and violated and blighted and virtue lost. I hope you are as outraged as I am. This extreme rhetoric around sexuality leads to self-hatred. It leads to stigmatizing, and sometimes it leads to suicidal ideation or even death by suicide. And you know what's particularly outrageous about this whole scenario? It's that Spencer W. Kimball goes on to demonize our most vulnerable people, which are those who die by suicide. Let me tell you what Spencer W. Kimball has to say about suicide. He writes, quote, a minister acquaintance of mine was found by his wife hanging. His thoughts had taken his life. Certainly he had not come to suicide in a moment, for he had been a happy, pleasant person as I had known him. It must have been a long decline, ever steeper, controlled by him at first, and perhaps out of hand as he neared the end of the trail. No one in his right mind, and especially if he has an understanding of the gospel, will permit himself to arrive at this point of no return. I can't think of anything worse than demonizing people who become so sad, so desperate, so isolated that they get to the point of wanting to take their own life. And to be told in a book by a man that claims to be a prophet, seer, and revelator that this is just a simple choice, that it's selfishness, that it just came because of a series of terrible choices and sins over time, that you can't be a happy and pleasant person at one point and then later have thoughts or engage in death by suicide. That it must have been a long decline, that it was controllable, that it's a choice, and then to sort of stigmatize it by saying no one in their right mind, and that nobody who's lived the gospel and has an understanding of the gospel will ever permit themselves to arrive at this point of no return. That implies that, number one, no one who's righteous should ever get to that point, which means that they've never been righteous to begin with. But it basically is blaming and shaming the people that deserve the most love and the most compassion. And it's the most horrific behavior we could ever see from a man that claims to be a special witness of Jesus Christ, a special ambassador of Jesus Christ, and again, a prophet, seer, and revelator who claims to speak for God. Why would you take this most vulnerable population and shame and stigmatize them? It's really inexcusable. But again, it's even more egregious if what you're doing is you're basically demonizing the ultimate behavior that you are causing. Because if you're causing LGBT people to feel thoughts of suicide, causing young men and women who masturbate to feel like they're worse than dirt, that they are committing sins worse than death, that they deserve death. And same with people who violate the law of chastity, or even who are rape victims, that their worth and value is somehow diminished. And thus you're causing them to have thoughts of self-loathing and or even thoughts of suicide. You're demonizing the very behavior you are causing. And this is particularly outrageous and egregious. And again, he goes on to have this outrageous quote that only a fool would ever consider taking his own life. Spencer W. Kimball, why would you call someone a fool who gets to that point of sadness and desperation? But let's not beat up too much on Spencer W. Kimball. He has now passed away. Mormon Church, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Deseret Book, Russell M. Nelson, Dallin H. Oaks, Jeffrey R. Holland, Dieter Uchtdorf, Sherry Dew. Why would you allow this book in 2021 to still be sold? And why have you not demanded that it be removed from every bookshelf of every home, every ward and stake building, and every bookstore you can find, including Siegel Book? Why have you not demanded that this book be removed from all the shelves all over? It is outrageous. And again, to demonize death by suicide while you're increasing its likelihood in God's name is literally horrific. And so I will again summarize with how I began, and don't leave because I have a call to action. But hate speech is one thing, but hate speech masked as the word of God is literally deadly. And I guarantee you, for decades, this book has led to tens of thousands of deaths of LGBTQ youth and adults, of youth and adults who can't stop masturbating, and youth and adults who have either been rape victims and or have engaged in premarital sex or extramarital sex. And again, if you don't believe me, listeners, please take a few minutes to write down your stories on my YouTube, on the YouTube channel for this video, or on the Facebook expression or the video stream, or go to mormonstories.org and share your experiences with this book so that we can have a record and a catalog of the carnage and the damage that this book has wrought and will continue to wreak or to cause as long as this book is still on the lips and in the mouths and in the minds of our leaders and in our churches. So, in all fairness, I will say, because I try to be fair on Mormon Stories podcast, the Mormon Church has improved its rhetoric around things like mental health and depression, LGBTQ issues, and even around death by suicide. Yes, that's true, but that is not enough. Why? Because generations of Mormon leaders, bishops, stake presidents, mission presidents, Sunday school teachers, temple presidents, parents, everyone have been taught these principles. They're firmly embedded in our brains. These principles live on, even in the recommendations of bishops and stake presidents and mission presidents and leaders. They live on. Even if this book were silently put to bed and it were no longer sold at Deseret Book, which is outrageous that it still is, these principles still live on in the minds and the hearts and the family home evening lessons and in the fatherly and motherly counsel of the members. So, in addition, these books still sit on the shelves of Mormon homes, of Mormon chapels and stake centers, in churches and missions all throughout the world. And it's still being recommended and taught. And again, this book today, January 18th, 2021, this book is still in print and sold at Deseret Book. Go check it right now. Go to Deseret Book and you will confirm this. As of January 18th, it's still being sold. And so this is what I am asking the Mormon Church to do. And this is where I'm asking for your help. I am asking the Mormon Church to do the following things. Ban the miracle of forgiveness in all its forms: electronic, digital, paperback. Do all you can, Mormon Church, to remove its availability from all the bookstores, especially Deseret Book, but Siegel Book, Amazon, wherever bookstores are, you should do a buyback, just do a buyback of this book. Tell your members to go get rid of this book. Do a book burning. If ever there was a cause for a book burning, it is a book burning over the Deseret Book. And my shout out to Kimberly Anderson, who I think has actually engaged in book burnings around this book. I would ask ex-Mormons to consider going to all your friends and family members, ward members, steakhouses, post-Mormons, liberal Mormons, progressive Mormons, true believing Mormons. You don't even need to be a liberal or ex-Mormon to do what I'm saying. This is a call to true believing Mormons, to Orthodox Mormons, to go on a hunt for wherever this book is sold or provided or offered on a shelf, to take the book down, to destroy it, to burn it, to shred it, to blow it up, to put it in big piles and to add gasoline to it and burn it, and to send us photos of the destruction of this book. It is a hateful, odious book that is not only hate speech, but hate speech in the name of God. Please help us get rid of this book. So Mormon Church, do all you can to get rid of this book and destroy it. Mormon Church, number 3, please send a memo out to all church leaders and members and teachers discouraging its use. And I would ask the Mormon Church to give a general conference talk apologizing for the harm that this book has caused. I know Dallin H. Oaks, you are on record as saying that the Mormon Church neither seeks nor give apologies. I'm asking you to make a small, teeny exception to this otherwise very important rule for you. Please apologize for the damage that this book has wrought on our population, because it continues to harm people. And there's no excuse that you're still selling it when it violates so many of the teachings that you yourself as a church teaches. So Mormon Church, denounce this book, apologize for it in general conference. And just like Spencer B. Kimball sent a memo to all bishoprics denouncing oral sex, here's a memo that should be sent to all bishoprics and stake presidents. Mormon Church, send a memo to all bishops and stake presidents and mission presidents and temple presidents, telling them to get rid of this book and to never teach from it again, because it's so awful. Okay? Now, here's how I want to end. I need your help, because they're going to ignore us unless we cause a ruckus. But if anything, the work of Sam Young has taught us, if anything, the work of other activists in the Mormon spheres has taught us, is that we can make a difference if we just act. So here is what I'm calling all of you to do. Write down this email address, service@deseretbook.com, or mediainquiry@deseretbook.com, or hrdept, the HR department, hrdept@deseretbook.com. Please write emails requesting that this book be taken down. If the tens of thousands of you who listen to Mormon stories, sometimes hundreds of thousands of you who listen to Mormon stories, if you will blast Deseret Book with your emails, I promise you this book can be taken down as early as today or tomorrow. So blast them with emails. Call Deseret Book. Flood their phone lines. 1-800-453-4532, toll free in the United States and Canada. Internationally, 801-517-3369. Flood their phone lines with requests to get rid of this odious book. Next, speak to your bishops, your stake presidents, your cousins and uncles and aunts who are area authorities or general authorities, anyone you know at Deseret Book, anyone in the leadership of the church. Speak to the influencers and ask them why this book is still being sold at Deseret Book and what can be done to get rid of it. Inform them as to these odious teachings. Copy and share with them this presentation. Do all you can to share this presentation with family, with friends, with bishops, with stake presidents, with any influencer. Share this everywhere right now. Please, all of you, there are 400 people right now listening, plus the thousands of you who listen afterwards. Please copy and paste a link to this presentation on your walls on Facebook, in Instagram, on Twitter, wherever you have social media accounts. Please share this presentation so that we can spread the word and lead a global movement to kill this book for once and for all. And then do me a favor and every day monitor DeseretBook.com. Go to DeseretBook.com, search and look for whether this book still comes up. My dream would be that by the end of today or tomorrow, by January 19th, at the latest, 2021, this book would no longer appear on the Deseret Book website. And every single day, I encourage you guys to continue. You just wake up in the morning, yawn, stretch, get your morning beverage, and then immediately Google Deseret Book, see if they're still selling this book. And if they are, plan to email and call and shame Deseret Book until they take this freaking book down. And once it's gone, I want to make you a promise. When COVID's over, we will have a big party. Save some of your Miracle of Forgiveness books if you want to. And in Salt Lake City, I will throw a massive party for whoever wants to come. We'll have karaoke, we'll have pizza, we'll dance and have fun. And we will burn as a final celebration of the Mormon Church's banning of this book. We will do a final huge book burn of the Miracle of Forgiveness and burn every copy that you guys bring as a way to say goodbye once and for all to this odious, awful book filled with hate speech. All right? And again, if you want to, please share your awful experiences with this book at mormonstories.org under this post, or on YouTube, or on the Mormon Stories Podcast Facebook page under this video, so that there's this eternal record of how much damage this book has wrought within Mormonism. And I'll just say one final favor, Mormon Church, you can do for me, Mormon Church, if you could please stop teaching the members that your prophets, seers, and revelators speak to and for God. That would go a long way towards preventing this from ever happening again. Because you know what? Claiming to speak to and for God is more power than any human should ever have. Okay? At best, if humans are going to believe in God, they should be having communication with God themselves. They should be doing their best to discern what God wants for them. But for any human to claim that they have privileged access to God and that they are presumptuous and arrogant enough to claim that they are in a position as to tell you, let alone millions of followers who are vulnerable, that they are speaking for and behalf of God is a damaging claim that leads to abuse and that leads to the harm of millions and millions of Mormons across the world. Just say you're giving your best opinion. Just say that you've prayed and this is what you think is right. That's fine. Say you're old and this is the wisdom that you've acquired over the years, maybe right, maybe wrong. But Mormon Church, please stop telling your members that your leaders are prophets, seers, and revelators that speak to and for God. That is a damaging practice, and it's at the root of all of this harm that Mormon Stories has been covering for so many years. Anyway, that's my modest proposal. I hope that you will consider joining me in this effort. And I really do believe if ever there were a mustard seed of faith, I have it. I have that mustard seed of faith that, as Alma 32 says, we can plant, which is that you, together with me, we together can destroy and end the miracle of forgiveness permanently within Mormon culture. And again, it's not enough to get it off of Deseret Book. We should not rest until every home, every ward building, every stake building, every mission home, every bookstore across the world, right, no longer carries this odious and hateful book. All right? That's my presentation. I want to thank the anonymous person who recommended that I give this presentation. I want to thank all of you of your support. I want to thank all of you who are going to help me make this vision a reality. Most importantly, I want to thank everyone who supports Mormon Stories Podcast, makes this possible. If you appreciate this podcast, if you appreciate what I do here on Mormon Stories, Please become a monthly subscriber or donor. Go to mormonstories.org, click on the donate button. It works from your phones. Type in mormonstories.org, click on the donate button, become a monthly donor. And I'll do this for as many decades as you guys are willing to support it. Also, thanks to everyone who listens and who donates. And thanks to all of you who share this content so that the world can know about it, so that we can make a change. Don't give up hope. Have a great 2021. There's so much good we can do together. I love you guys. Thanks to all the healers that make everything possible. You guys are amazing. Take care, and we'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care, everybody.